Hello, everyone. I hope you are more resistant to heat than I am, because for me, this is like too much already. But yeah, I'll try to survive. Great to be here. Great to be here again. We're trying to be present at this conference pretty much every single time for the past couple of years. It's always great conferences. It's always great conversations. And I'm hoping this one is going to be one of the highlights as well. So my name is Matt. I lead BD for Redstone, which is an Oracle provider. And with me, I've got a set of great panelists here. So I'll let you guys give a 1-minute intro to yourselves, starting with Markus here.
Perfect. And I can probably be a bit quicker because I just talked about Mento a bit. My name is Markus. I'm one of the founders of Mento. With Mento, we're building an Onchain FX platform that is globally accessible. I'm coming from an economics background, studied economics, did a PhD in economics, worked in traditional finance for a long time. And then for the past 7 years, I've been working on stablecoin, first in the Celo ecosystem and now with Mento on a cross-chain platform. Really looking forward to this one. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Hadick. I'm a general partner at Dragonfly. I lead all of our stablecoin market structure, CeFi, some of our DeFi stuff. Yeah, that's me. If you don't know us, we're about $4 billion under management. We invest seed through Series B, and love talking about stablecoins.
I'm Nas, founder and CEO at Bastion. Have been in the crypto space for quite a bit of time. More recently, was Chief Security Officer at A16Z Crypto, and started Bastion as a regulated crypto as a service and stablecoin as a service infrastructure provider. So we issue essentially for large corporates stablecoins and help them integrate crypto capabilities and stablecoin capabilities.
Hi, I'm Martin. I'm currently BD for Curve Finance, and my background is on-chain. I have more than a decade of living on-chain, and since 4 years I'm like full-time. I work for different DAOs, and now I'm helping Curve on the BD side.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So starting off with, I believe something that we can all agree upon, which is this multi-stablecoin future that's coming or is already here. The first question I've got is for Rob. I would like to ask for your, I guess, investment POV when it comes to, we are seeing JP Morgan with JPM, that was like 2018 now, JPMD, so the tokenized bank deposits. We expect other banks to follow when it comes to joining the stablecoin craze right now. Either from the US, from Europe, from Asia, of course. So from your investment perspective, if you wanted to bet on the infrastructure for the multi-stablecoin future, would it be a venture bet or would it be a liquid buy? Would you say that the infrastructure already exists, or do we need new types of primitives to be able to serve that future?
Yeah, so there are certain things which are going to probably exist in some sort of bank infrastructure that is probably closed loop and maybe not on public blockchains that will continue to exist, right? So JP Morgan has been doing a pilot with the Monetary Authority of Singapore and with the central bank there to do kind of basically a cross-border transaction, primarily around like large bank deposits, right? Like that will probably continue to happen, and we will see a lot of the banks work within that type of framework. But if I think back to what do I think stablecoins do? I think stablecoins are essentially programmable money that are going to allow for a completely new on-chain financial ecosystem to be built, right? Like they are the base layer for everything else that will be built. And whether that's US dollars or, and obviously this panel is about FX, any other stablecoin as well. And I think about, okay, well, like what are banks good at? Well, you know what? They're really fucking bad at tech. Like they are awful, right? So, and I had a lot of people reach out and say about the Fiserv announcement recently, and they said, okay, so Fiserv has their own stable coin, and they're going to allow the community banks in the U.S. to use them. Like, is that and they have all this distribution? Is that good or bad for your venture bets? And like, I don't know if people understand this, but like these the banking cores at these places, like they are not cloud native. Like, they fall over all the time. A lot of things are built on top of hard codes. In fact, I was talking to one one guy at who deals with a community bank who was saying that they hard-coded that they cannot do any settlement on the weekend, and they literally built their entire infrastructure on top of that, and they do not know how to change it and like not have the entire banking core fall over, right? Like this is the type of stuff that we're dealing with. And so clearly you need new people to come and build better infrastructure and better technology if we're going to, do what I think is going to happen with the stablecoin future.
Perfect. So plenty of opportunity just to help the big boys actually use the rails that we are so native to. The next question would be to Nassim. Nassim, you're in the business of making new stablecoins, as I understand the vision behind Bastion. So how would that work in your specific perspective when it comes to liquidity? Isn't your business vision, isn't it directly leading to what everybody calls liquidity fragmentation, but in general creating a lot of very illiquid markets that can't really be used in a sizable manner?
Yeah, I mean it's the hardest question. I would say that stablecoin success is very much a distribution and liquidity game. The distribution, typically, the larger players already have that covered. They can actually hot swap stablecoins as part of the money flows that they manage fairly easily, like less easily on the banking side, more easily on the tech, kind of large consumer tech side, just because, as Rob was mentioning, they're just better at it, and they can actually have the engine that actually powers the settlement be hot swapped fairly easily. Liquidity is the hard answer. And so I think that whenever you hear about the large, in the news, like large player X wants to, not X the company, but XYZ wants to launch their actual, their own stablecoin, they're not necessarily thinking about only using their own stablecoin. They do understand that the vast majority of the liquidity, especially in the emerging markets where people are hard to reach and where the value of stablecoins is, even greater, they need to leverage existing stablecoins that have already this liquidity built, right? And for them to actually concentrate the liquidity that they would have to build, that they would have to manage, that they would have to incentivize with a single asset that is easily accessible. And whether that looks like an on-chain liquidity or something that is managed by themselves, at the end of the day, they understand that they need to build, for example, strong liquidity at their own stablecoin and USDC, their own stablecoin USDT, and then leverage the existing rails that have been built as part of all the on and off ramps and exchanges and so on that we all know. So we're seeing a lot of that to at least do the work of bootstrapping the liquidity. It would be concentrated at the branded stablecoin to USDC, for example, and then leveraging all the paths that USDC has already built.
Would you call it then a major tailwind for the existing stablecoins when it comes to, I still have to be paired against the biggest assets right now. So I still have to either hold them or I still have to make the markets against them. Would you say that this will strengthen the position of USDC, USDT on the market against the competitors that still have to kind of be, in that game with them?
I think that the network effects around liquidity are just gigantic, and they probably grow faster than the new entrants can eat their lunch, or at least that's what we've seen so far. If you look at PYUSD, if you look at all the other stablecoins that have been attempted so far, you can see that the growth, even the relative growth of Tether and USDC have been, outpacing them by an order of magnitude. And so I do think that the stickiness especially on off ramps in emerging market is absolutely gigantic, and it can play with the redemption fees essentially to dictate how much flows out of the ecosystem and at which pace, and forcing certain relationships and partnerships to be built with them.
don't know if that growth point's true. Like if you look at the growth of like RLUSD, M0, Agora now, like, and you look at the recent growth, like if we think about it for the last, like, call it like 3 to 6 months, like as everyone's starting to get this like fever, like we are starting to see the relative growth get bigger as more people just basically try to like bootstrap and really like dog food their own products.
How much do you think? Okay, so on the supply side, sure. How do you think about actual usage as part of money flows? Or what do you use as a KPI, for example, for success?
Yeah, I mean, I'm using TVL or issuance right now. I think obviously, hopefully, it's all it's eventually real world transactions, obviously as well. But I get your point that like, okay, well, Tether's being used more for peer-to-peer transactions and CeFi trading and USDC and DeFi and things like that. But I do see a world where everyone is trying to dog food like their own usage, right?
Yeah.
And what we're going to see is like a lot of people. To your point about PYUSD, I think that has more to do with like PayPal just not being particularly good at figuring out how to put this in. Like if they just put it into Zoom right now and they get into every wallet for every single person who's doing remittance in Zoom, it'd be a multi-billion-dollar asset.
Yeah.
And I think everyone needs to dog food or incentivize their own usage because often the infrastructure is not ready that it's actually easier and faster to actually use stablecoins for these use cases. The infrastructure in many cases is then still either so hard to access or in many cases simply just doesn't exist, that it's, even though theoretically stablecoins are cheaper and easier to use, it is in reality, it is not. And when it comes to, for example, local currency stablecoins, we have seen before we actually can go there and have stablecoins in many different currencies, we first actually need to build that infrastructure that they're easily accessible because it doesn't really exist yet. We cannot just say, okay, now we have stablecoins and now everyone is doing FX trading on chain. No, the infrastructure is just not there. And then, of course, liquidity has something to do with it. And liquidity in the end means being able to access the right amount of assets at the right price. I mean, for certain prices, for 8 euros, an apartment here in Cannes is also very liquid. Someone would buy it immediately. But it needs to be the right amount and the right price. And often, basically, these markets are still not ready for institutional liquidity so that the right size can be actually accessed at the right price. So this is why I think we need to build the infrastructure that then this can actually happen on an institutional level.
I think this is a great segue. And Markus, before I come back to you specifically on that, because you sort of touched upon this a little bit in your speech. Let me actually ask Martin on a more technical level, just because when it comes to Curve, your guys' stable swap algorithm, it's very battle tested at this point. You could tell, especially for stable coins that kind of look similar from the outside when it comes to the risk profile or their behavior. But then in a world 10 years from now, when we have like really different types of stable coins on chain with super different risk profiles, would you say that the same kind of technical infrastructure that we have right now, this algorithm, would it be enough, or would we have to add some more variables to it? Would we have to change it anyhow?
Yeah, this is evolving. Mitch gave the presentation today of YB and the CryptoSwap, the new version of CryptoSwap, where you can shift basically the density with that kind of donation, is also very suitable for FX, basically. This is one of the core, like we as Curve, we are waiting for on-chain FX like since quite some time. And what I see is more some kind of hyper-dollarization, basically, in a moment. And it's also some kind of bootstrapping issue, in the sense. I think we steadily improve our technology, and this CryptoSwap version 2 is a very good solution for this, because at the end, I guess there will be, we go for the biggest market first, so there will be some euro, USD is like one of the biggest markets, I guess, in FX. So it's basically the pot to win, and if we are able to construct one big pool, whoever then we pair with, then we have a chance to have a very good solution. And it's not that StableSwap is something we have since like the start. CryptoSwap is also around since like quite some time, but now we're still improving our infrastructure, and I think we have we're on track, basically.
Okay, so it's always going to be an ongoing battle with
Yeah.
like trying to kind of front run the market and have the right infrastructure when the boom happens. So then, Markus, coming back to you, and especially the angle very interesting for me here is the regional aspect. I know you guys are very, very big on the regional stablecoins in Latin America, in Africa, in other places in the world. So talk to me more about what really is the added complexity when you want to switch something like a JP Morgan coin or whatever stablecoin issued by a US based bank with something local, something based out of LATAM, for example, or Africa. How much of added complexity that is, and what is the kind of infrastructure on the technical level, but I assume also on the legal level or the operational level that we have to have in place?
Yeah, and I think for quite some time, Oracle-driven pools have been not super popular in the field because, of course, how an AMM and constant pricing models work. It was really a great new infrastructure on chain to trade new types of assets that are very volatile, that maybe are assets that only exist on chain and where also price finding happens on chain. But what I mentioned before also in the talk, in the FX markets, this is different. Price finding happens off chain. The price of yen in pound is determined, at least for now, off chain. So I think the friction then often is to go between one currency to another. Currently on chain, the prices are just not the most efficient prices. You need a lot of liquidity providers. You need a lot of arbitrageurs that actually step in and balance these on-chain pools so that they match the off-chain prices. You need, in the end, a lot of trading happen. And then with newer infrastructure that works cross-chain on many networks, including Redstone, for example, providing FX prices, now we can actually set up a different way, how like where an Oracle resets these pools at the off-chain price in very high intervals, and only in between these intervals, these markets can fall back to an AMM solution. But you actually have that resetting at really high intervals, so that you actually can provide a bit or actually much more efficient FX market on chain. And then in these regions that I mentioned, the interesting thing is that in many of these regions, or that you mentioned, in many of these regions don't even have any FX market. So the dollar is popular for many reasons, also for the reason that it's relatively stable when it comes to purchasing power. But the dollar is also popular because in many of these regions, you actually have to do an FX swap always via the dollar, because there are no direct pairs that exist in these regions. I mentioned in the talk before, there is just no Kenyan shilling to Ghana and Cedi market, although there's a lot of businesses that work in Kenya and in Ghana and have to do the FX conversion, or that have to do FX hedging and so on a constant basis. And Web3 in general is perfect infrastructure for that, because in contrast to that off-chain FX market, it's available 24/7, and it's available with a common infrastructure in every country. So I think there's huge potential in there to bring this on chain.
Perfect. And bringing that back to Nassim, we've talked about the deep liquidity that you've got to establish with your own stablecoin against the biggest ones right now, to be able to have a market and an asset that's actually usable. But from your guys' perspective at Bastion, is there anything more there on the technical side of things that you are also, I guess, working on or helping the issuers with to be able to do it? Or would you say that as long as you have the liquidity, it should be all, all usable, all good for the user?
Yeah, a lot of the companies that we're talking to are also pretty excited about leveraging the assets in a way that is where, for the first time, they don't necessarily need to have the trade-off, like a hard compromise be done between liquidity and yield at the Treasury, kind of like at the Treasury management level. And so for them, either holding the stablecoin within the global corporate treasuries, because you typically have like, large overarching group, a bunch of sub-entities all around the world, constantly moving money around. And for them, the process of, you have a corporate kind of like treasury of one entity, selling that into local fiat, sending that across the globe, repurchasing somewhere else, is like extremely expensive. Something that we're discussing with pretty much every single company is having the ability to settle directly, not necessarily at the stablecoin level, but having that done at the reserve asset level, so at the tokenized treasuries, where you would have the send essentially on the tokenized treasuries behind the scenes from the reserve to the corporate treasury, and then the stablecoin being burned without necessarily having to have any sort of swap to a local currency or like a send to the local entity. So I think that not necessarily just thinking about the stablecoin FX, where it's stablecoin to stablecoin or stablecoin to fiat, or having the stablecoin sandwich between two fiat currencies, but sometimes just having tokenized treasuries that can also be sent across the globe 24/7 and used as a settlement asset for the corporate, like intra-corporate use cases or inter-corporate use cases, is actually a pretty big one. And a lot of them want to expand that to the merchants that they work with if they all share, let's say that they all use BIDL behind the scenes, or like some, common type of asset that forms both the corporate treasury on one end and then the reserve of the stablecoin on the other end. And there's interoperability, and they can actually optimize the flows that way. So those are some of the things that we work on. Integrations with on-chain FX systems. I think everyone is looking for just some smart order routing at the built-in as part of all the flows that they have for on-ramping, off-ramping. I think that like those are probably the biggest things that we're working on.
When it comes to the intra-corporate level or the use case, DTCC out of the US, they've released something called the Great Collateral Experiment lately, which is basically this big simulation of showing how an investment bank can work on the blockchain rails. And they show in real time how different that would be if a subsidiary out of London could actually touch the liquidity of the main body of the bank in the US in real time. And this is exactly what you were describing here, just like moving the treasuries on the decentralized ledger as opposed to trying to do the accounting on both sides. It's very, very fascinating to watch it in real time, and they've done a great job in actually explaining this, so highly recommended. Good, Rob, when it comes to kind of staying still in the realm of infrastructure here, as institutional FX traders are very much used to very deep liquidity and tight spreads. But then here over in the blockchain world, we are still kind of figuring things out when it comes to capital efficiency for traders, and when it comes to maintaining deep liquidity for markets. So how far away are we in 2025 from actually onboarding the FX market, like maybe totally on the blockchain rails? What has to happen on the technical side of things to be able to serve that kind of use case with the same kind of UX for the institutional players to be trading on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's kind of two parts to that question, which is, okay, well, like tokenized treasuries, to your first point. I'm sure, don't know if anyone here is, and I'm sure there are people in here who have kind of run some sort of protocol that is trying to mint and redeem, call it like BIDL or one of the large tokenized treasuries. It's actually quite easy to get into BIDL. It's actually really fucking hard to get out of it in any size, right? And there's a real problem right now that if you want to run it fully on chain, you just cannot get the size to grow into any sort of scale that you would need for real businesses to actually come on chain and FX traders and the type of markets that we want to see. I think on the FX side, what we're really seeing is we are starting to see pricing that is better than, call it, these like, multi-dealer, single dealer, like FX platforms that exist, kind of in the traditional FX world. But that pricing is better, not particularly when there's, call it, two in any real size, number one, and two, when there's like two tokenized assets. It's often happening because you have somebody in some local jurisdiction who has a really, really good partnership with a FX broker who wants to be in USDC and wants that USDC and that dollar access, and so they're willing to give you, call it like whatever, the peso, or which is a really deep market, or depending on where you're at, for relatively cheap. And we've seen a bunch of people raise capital who are, essentially just trading desks with like good partnerships and an API, and the venture capitalists act like it's like some sort of tech revolution, and it's not, right? It's just a financial product. I think on the FX side, it really is just a liquidity begets liquidity, and it really is just being able to bring transparency and being able to bring kind of better, APIs, better sort of like plugins and SDKs for people to access that market, because the single dealer and multi-dealer platforms people exist today just are really opaque, and they're built into old infrastructure. But as that starts to happen, we'll see this pick up. I actually don't think this is a particularly hard problem to solve. It's just one that needs more usage.
And then, Martin, coming back to you, kind of a segue from my previous question as well about the algorithm. So the second question is more about, I'd say, liquidity. How do you guys think about just that? So making sure that whatever whatever assets you can use on Curve, the liquidity is big enough for institutional players to actually be able to trade, stablecoins in size, either tying that to the project that Mitch just announced, or in general when it comes to the strategy that you guys have for the bigger capital to be onboarded on chain.
Yeah, and indeed, I think in this sense we see us as an infrastructure basically. So we are not the market makers in this. It's like all people make the markets on Curve. So we shift this to partners, and they do it for us. So they do it because it's a permissionless platform. We don't even know basically who they are. Sometimes we know them, but sometimes we don't. So we try just to be having the best algos for this kind, and we are a technology company, so we try to have the best technology, and there's still like design space to make it better. And I think Mitch showed like maybe several times that he's always able to ship something on top, which is not easy. So it's that's basically our how we work. So we advise people if they ask us how they should build best, but somehow others are doing it for us.
And would you envision any form of opinionation on your guys' side forming, on top of that? So what I'm talking about here is we've seen that especially in lending market lately, coming from this very permissionless open model, or you could say, semi-permissionless, the old compound and Aave model of a single pool. And then we've seen things like Morpho actually create this underlying level of permissionless markets, but then adding the complexity level on top. So kind of tying it all back together in the form of vault curators that actually are opinionated when it comes to what types of collateral they accept, what types of collateral they don't accept, the risk profile and stuff like this. Would you see, when it comes to the different types of stablecoins coming to Curve in the future, would you say that there is a space to kind of follow a certain path like this? Or would you rather stay on this very basic, unopinionated level and just provide the best possible basic infrastructure for trading stables?
Yeah, of course, we study these ideas basically, but an AMM is very simple in the sense that curation is what we can create based on AMM is the density of the liquidity, and StableSwap is quite easy in this. CryptoSwap is more difficult to handle, but somehow what we think about, if there's like a model where we basically can have curators and they optimize the pools, because you start with a certain size, and then it also depends on the volatility of the assets, which kind of density you need. And we have like Llama Risk, basically, who's like they're looking at the big pools who make a lot of revenue for the Curve DAO. They optimize them, but somehow we also think about maybe finding some kind of creation model that somebody else can basically change these parameters, because now all the parameters change, have to be over the DAO. So we make a vote, and then we adopt this as we change it, and this is not like, it doesn't scale very well. So we think about having this more scale. So basically, some asset issuers or market makers, we can delegate the right to them to optimize the pools, and that's one way for us to grow. Basically, that we always do it for us, and we think about this also on the AMM level, basically.
The reason I ask this because we are kind of also having quite a lot of strategic discussions over at Redstone in terms of what basically the future of pricing looks like, especially with things like, let's say there is, thousands of stablecoins 10 years from now, from banks, from fintechs, you name it. And then there's perhaps going to be a role of, the role that Moody's agency right now has when it comes to credit ratings. There's probably going to be an equivalent, or even maybe the same company actually, assessing the, the default probability of a stable coin. Because, when JP Morgan creates a stable coin, like it's not going to default. Everybody knows that. But when the Bank of Kenya or a smaller country in general does it, the risk profile is probably going to be different. So this perhaps creates a new variable in the whole pricing and the whole pricing equation, where you maybe have to adjust the price based on that probability as well. And I kind of think about the curation model that Morpho has right now in a kind of a similar way. So you construct a portfolio as a vault curator of perhaps similar or different assets based on like risk, risk.
But I agree. Yeah, but the risk, you see the quality in the what you have to pay for liquidity, and this builds a market price. It's not like we setting not the price. There's a market price. If it's an open system, people bring the asset to this pool as long as they think it's a fair market price. So this is like done by the market. We can't set like caps on rewards on liquidity, because then that's not it's a market price forming, and we see this all the time. Better quality stablecoins, they have a lower price, and new ones who are untested, they have to pay more for the liquidity, for the same amount of liquidity, basically.
Yeah, and if the Bank of Kenya, for example, believes that the asset that they issue is underpriced, they can always make the market themselves, right? Like they can always buy when it's too low, and then actually have the redemption for the equivalent amount of currency themselves. Like you have a lot of issuers that will do this job of making the market and exploiting the inefficiencies on the assets themselves. There's no reason not to. They're a nearly zero fee on ramp and off ramp, which means that they have access to the equivalent asset. Like you can make the market yourself, even as an issuer.
I mean, just to put a very fine point on this, like not all stablecoins should trade at the same price. There's been like a lot of conversation about, okay, well, we need a clearinghouse, and they just need to be, not just interoperable, but they need to be able to like swap one for one. If we're going to have with, all of these different stablecoins, and we're going to make sure that they all work together. And like, that's just not true. Like, that's not how finance works. These are different assets. They have different backing. They have different collateral. They are regulated differently. They are issued by people who have better or worse credit, right? And so they're going to trade differently. It'll look like an FX market, right? Like that's what it's going to look like. And I can see you really want to talk about this, but that's what it's going to look like. And we need the people and the infrastructure to run that FX market. But this idea that we're going to have some sort of clearinghouse that is going to make all stablecoins a one-to-one transferable it's fantasy. It belies how finance works.
And I really want to talk about this because I think this is a really, really important point, that these are sometimes assets that are not traded at the right price. And we've seen this in the past in many instances. So, for example, when Silicon Valley Bank went sideways, then the price of USDC adjusted for a brief amount of time. I think for many, these stable coins often also are called fiat-backed stablecoins, but in reality they are backed by credit, and credit has a credit risk. And then in the Silicon Valley case, the credit risk materialized, and then actually the price adjusted. But it was not the case that ahead of time actually USDC was trading at a discount because they had too much collateral locked up in credit at Silicon Valley Bank. And I think it's a really, really important point that the market here actually has to become more efficient so that these assets trade at the right price.
In general, I think the price will come down for on-chain liquidity because I have the feeling the cyclical of our industry somehow is hindering the growth, basically, because every time we go in a bullish scenario, liquidity gets very expensive on-chain, and this basically is then hindering the growth because then every new entrant has to pay the same price for liquidity, and it's pretty high, so people can't enter the market. And I think it's very important to have more liquidity or more competition, more liquidity on-chain, because I guess over time price will come down on stablecoin liquidity, and they have to, because otherwise it's just, it's not healthy for the overall market long term, basically.
I mean, this is kind of getting off topic, so you can stop me. But like, this is also a very important point, which is that like right now for like real world usage of stablecoins, liquidity is really expensive, right? Like if you people are trying to do things like, provide basic credit for like pre-funding of actually like paying for paying for things in stablecoins. And we're talking people are, charging 15% plus like token rewards on top. So the liquidity providers are expecting a 20-25% all in return, maybe even higher to go and provide this liquidity. And like that makes payments uneconomical if that's going to happen on chain. And so what we really need is we need people who do like, credit card receivable securitizations who do that off chain to be able to come on chain. And we need the right infrastructure. We need the right people to bring them on chain. And we need those people to feel comfortable providing the type of liquidity in obviously things like Curve. But then as we think about like, okay, well, do we want to bring, the trillions of dollars of payments that are happening and off chain, on chain? And my world, I think that's coming. But like this is one of the most important issues that we have right now.
So a good segue to last question as we are getting close to our time. Looking at the future, let's say 18 or 24 months from now, maybe starting with you, Markus, what would be the single biggest breakthrough that would have to happen for the multi-stablecoin FX to really be seamless as possible?
I think, as we mentioned before, first of all, infrastructure needs to be fixed on-chain so that actually then in 24 months from now, institutions are actually ready or willing to bring all of the FX trading on-chain. And for us, this means we need to provide the right markets that are more accessible and more efficient in terms of pricing, because without a good price, there's then probably also no liquidity. So for me, it's like a big question of infrastructure, and probably also regulation and other things. But for me, it's like infrastructure is very important to actually get to an institutional FX market on chain in 24 months.
The regulation is obviously a big part of this, but let's put that behind us. That's boring. The main thing that matters is just like real world usability, and so that people can actually stay in stables on the other side. Because like what we see right now in like non-US dollar currencies, and even in the euro, which is the largest stablecoin outside of US dollars, like people aren't really staying in those stablecoins, right? They're not really using them. Like, we have a portfolio company that's doing, like Brazilian, like US dollar to Brazilian real to euro for a company, and nobody wants to stay in Euro C. They want to then use SEPA instant to go put it into their euro bank account. But if they get the USDC back, they actually will stay in the USDC because people want to actually use that. And so we need more people to be able to have ways to use and to have stablecoins be accepted in those other currencies in these local markets. And if that happens, then people will stay in stables, then it becomes cheaper and liquidity will get much larger. And until that time happens, everyone's just going to be quoting, some sort of fiat FX pair and then, swapping directly into a bank account, which is what every time you put money through a yellow card, that's what's happening.
I was actually about to say exactly the same thing as Rob, regulatory, but boring for everyone in here. Just for context for everyone, because there is this, I call that the time to live of stablecoin, for the stablecoin to stay in the form of stablecoins for as long as possible. You need to just incentivize essentially the time to live to increase. And in order for the TTL to increase, you need just distribution, more availability of wallets globally to receive and to send. And so for that to happen, you need the large corporates who have this existing distribution, both on the consumer side and on the merchant side, to be able to send and receive stablecoins, and they get comfortable with once the regulations are in. So that's the first one. The second thing that I'm hearing the most is spendability. And so cards, I think stablecoin link cards are probably, and making stablecoin link cards as ubiquitous as possible is going to be extremely important. So very, very bullish on, Rain and Bridge and others essentially pushing in this direction. We're facilitating that through partnerships for all the companies essentially that we work with, because they need to have more spendability via cards.
But it needs to actually be on chain and not be wrapping an issuer bank and then swap
100%.
into a fiat like the bridge card.
100%. We'll get there.
I guess it's more maybe a wish, but I would like to see one non-dollar stablecoin who has like $500 million like TVL somehow. And I don't know if it's the euro. Euro has like regulationally, and now the show is in the US more. Maybe it's an emerging market one, and I think this would be a good showcase for everyone where the space is heading. But I think it takes a little bit longer than 1 year or two, maybe.
We are at time, everybody. So thank you so much for your attention, and thanks to the panelists for great insights.
Thank you.